Pode ser o Grupo Corpo ou a Companhia de Dança do Pantanal, Museu de Arte Moderna de São Paulo ou Arte em Cores, Filarmônica de Minas Gerais ou Programa Vale Música. Onde tem cultura, a Vale está. Dos projetos que todo mundo já conhece, até aqueles projetos que todo mundo precisa conhecer. É valorizando essa cultura que crescemos e evoluímos juntos.
Com o apoio do Instituto Cultural Vale, a arte popular é destaque no Maranhão.
E o nosso papel é fazer com que elas sejam conhecidas, valorizadas.
Vale, transformar a mineração hoje é transformar o amanhã de todos.
O Rio é a cidade mais nacional do Brasil. É por isso que as Olimpíadas foram no Rio e a final do Mundial também. O Maracanã é nacional, a Sapucaí é nacional, o Rock em Rio é no Rio, mas é nacional. A TV Globo nasceu no Rio, mas virou nacional. É natural que o jornal O Globo seja um jornal nacional, porque ele é a cara de um país cuja cara é a do Cristo Redentor. O Globo, um jornal nacional.
Ministério do Turismo e a Associação Casa Azul apresentam 20ª Flip Festa Literária Internacional de Paraty. O projeto conta com benefício da Lei Federal de Incentivo à Cultura. Vale Mais Cultura. Tem patrocínio oficial do Instituto Cultural Vale. Patrocínio Itaú. Copatrocínio O Globo. Apoio Esquilo, Mac Móveis, Prefeitura de Paraty, Globo Livros, Unigel, CQSFV Advogados e Oceana. Concepção Associação Casa Azul. E realização Secretaria Especial da Cultura, Ministério do Turismo, Pátria Amada Brasil, Governo Federal.
Bom, a Flip foi uma coisa muito incrível desde o começo, na verdade. Quando começou em 2002, né, ela já disse a que veio. Eu era gestora da escola do Sembra, que é a escola estadual, e pude participar de mesas memoráveis. Primeiro que eu acho que foi na primeira Flip que teve o Chico, teve o Gilberto Gil apresentando, ele era ministro da Cultura. sempre fui participante de mesas, né, mesas memoráveis, mas, acima de tudo, como educadora e como gestora escolar, com o crescimento da Flipinha e da Flipzona, como que Paraty se tornou uma cidade onde o hábito de leitura foi ficando importante. Você ter livros, você buscar novos livros, começou a fazer parte de um cotidiano dos alunos da escola, que foi um pulo do gato muito importante que a Flip trouxe para nós, sabe? A Flipinha também movimentando aqueles artistas locais, como o Jubileu, fazendo todos aqueles bonecos, e, sabe, envolve os artistas locais. Foi muito incrível o papel da Flip num turismo cultural que acabou sendo uma marca de Paraty. Então a gente tem uma cidade mais literária depois e uma cidade mais conhecida por ser da Flip, com certeza. Eu quero que tenha mais 20 anos de Flip aí no mínimo para a gente continuar tendo o prazer de conviver com a literatura na nossa cidade e possibilitar que outras pessoas daqui da nossa terra abram essa janela. Eu acho que é para todo mundo.
Flip 20 anos. Vidas que transformam lugares, que transformam pessoas. Escreva conosco essa história. Faça parte da rede amiga da Flip para continuarmos transformando juntos os próximos 20 anos. Acesse flip.org.br e faça sua doação.
Good morning, good afternoon. A man was standing there silently staring at her. Her eyes were fastened on the fearful young woman, and he was motionless, as if struck by awe or admiration. Ursula and the man remained silent for some time. Her surprise and terror and the repugnance she felt at the man's sinister look were the reasons for her prolonged silence. He, meanwhile, contemplated the woman's pure and perfectly beautiful face with visible delight. They were both quiet. Ursula was trying to gather courage to run away from this stranger that so upset her, while he contemplated her black braids resting softly on her ivory shoulders, her delicate and translucent hands concealing her eyes, and her lovely cherubic angelic face. Finally, the girl took her hands off her fair silky face and with disgust and disdain looked straight at the man who remained speechless. Ursula's cold stare enhanced the beauty of her face, which still showed signs of the recent emotional events she had experienced. And the man understood what her stare meant. Go away.
Rita Segato, my God. So, good evening. My name is Pedro Meira Monteiro. I'm one of the curators of this festival's edition with my dear friends Fernando Bastos and Milena Brito. And it is my task to introduce now. It's amazing. It's almost the last roundtable in this 20th anniversary edition of our festival. And I want to stress the collective nature not only of our collective of curators, but also our collective in the world of collectives, a sea of notion of collectives. Some that include, of course, you, conscious and unconscious collectives, the Libras, interpreters. You can't even imagine the amazing job of our sign interpreters. You can't imagine the fantastic task that has been to translate poetry in the previous roundtable. It was amazing. Poetry of signs, and all the collectives, all of those that are cleaning up this carpet so that it is clean when you come in the room and everything is shining. And so many wonderful participants that make this flip happen here backstage, Makoto, all of those that are working, everybody in the board of directors, the guests, the invited authors, the participants. And this roundtable 19th is Brazil and its crossroads. And our moderator is the DJ Nanni Rios, DJ reviewer Nanni Rios, and Cidinha da Silva and Cristhiano Aguiar, great writers here with us today this afternoon. Good morning. I was introduced as a DJ. I loved it. Great. In this party. It's great to be back in this stage. I want to thank the invitation once again by the three curators, Fernando Bastos, Milena Brito, Pedro Meira. Thank you very much. And I want to thank the production at the festival. Everybody's so kind. They have been so sweet. Maybe your testimony is the same. Thank you very much. The interpreters, translators, sign translation, and everything that is making this festival fantastic. I'm Nanni. I'm a journalist. I represent the Baleia Publishing House with anti-racist and gender feminist themes focused in contemporary literature. We love living authors and poetry. That is our publishing house, Baleia. And I will introduce our guests, and they will sign their books when we finish this roundtable. So you can go to Travessa Bookstore when we finish our conversation. And of course, you're all invited to participate in this conversation. You can write your questions in the pieces of paper. And this is not only my privilege to be here with them here in the States. Cidinha da Silva, she was born in Belo Horizonte in 1966. She graduated in history. She has a master's degree and a PhD. And she studied public policies for books and living with the focusing in African studies. And she is also the founder of the Kwanzaa Institute, focusing in institution affirmative action, community action. And she has also been the administration of the Palmares Agency. And she's a writer with a lot of books, 20 books. And she has a lot of books. So I will just mention some you can look for in the library. An issue in New York in 2019, short stories with her best short stories, Ejusilar, and To Begin, the last title, 2 collections in 2019. She also launched the essays Stop Killing Us, 2016, 2019, Survivors. She has children's books as Kuani, and we published with Baleia Publishing House the 9 Combs from Africa, Every Trident in Its Place, Racism in Brazil, and book of poetry, love songs and caring, and playwrights, Black Theater by Cidinha da Silva. Just a few of her books. She wrote many more. And Cristhiano Aguiar, he was born in 1981 in Campina Grande. He is a writer, critic, He has a master's degree in literary, and he has a PhD in Mackenzie University, and he has also a PhD in Berkeley from the United States. He published in the United States, in England, in Argentina, and he wrote several books, amongst them Beside the Wall, The Fair, Narratives and Fiction Spaces, At the Other Border of Leviathan, Epilogy of the Fever, and now Northeastern Gothic, his last book. We will talk about your work because, of course, these two writers are here thanks to the hard work of small publishing houses. So a round of applause, paying tribute to small publishing houses. So we decided to start our conversation reading some fragments of their books. So I invite Cristhiano, please. He will read part of his short story. Hi everybody. Good morning everyone. It is a joy and honor to be here in this stage. Really, I am really moved, happy, and to be here with Cidinha da Silva, a writer that I have read for so many years. It's an honor, Cidinha, to share the stage with you. And Nanni, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to meet you. Well, I will read an excerpt of a short story called The Jaguars. And people like it. And today I realized that my short story is partially inspired in my previous experiences here in Paraty. Let me tell you quickly what this short story is about. You invited a writer that writes terror short stories. So let's imagine a city in the state of Paraíba that has people that live in a community filled with jaguars, and if you go out from your house and you need to go to the drugstore or the grocery store, you run the risk of being eaten by a jaguar. So as I describe this city, it's an imaginary city that is part the city of Olinda in Pernambuco, part of Paraty, and a part of Areia. The air, or the brightness of the air, we don't know if the dance, the play of darkness and light, well, something in the landscape of the street showed the subtle and comfortable electricity. Being sure how much in our heads loomed the threat. They lived in a small town, a tourist town, famous by their conserved history blogs in the historic neighborhood. The mother was born and raised, and now she was scared of being eaten up, devoured. Before the jaguars, the streets of both sides of the street were filled with tables and chairs, people drinking, chatting, smoking, flirting, tourists and people that went to the bars, taking in the smells. Street artists made their music presentations, craftsmen, craft women, indigenous peoples would put their carpets in the sidewalks to sell their art. People that were begging, they would put out their black hands, expecting change from the dwellers or visitors that were all white. They were scared, hiding. Everybody knew. Diana is the character. Diana's mother was scared, and she knew that there were groups that would come and clean up. But what about now? And what about now with the jaguars? The city was nothing. Nothing. No one. Nothing. Just heat in suspension in the air. Thank you. That was a fragment of the short story Northeastern Gothic. Good morning. I greet and I ask for the permission of my forefathers that built the city of Paraty, the wealth of the city. They did not enjoy. I greet, I thank, and I am a sister and a brother to the descendants of my forefathers, my foremothers, women, men that are still not enjoying the wealth they produce. My brothers and sisters, black men and women, brothers and sisters that clean up the hotels, the inns where we sleep, that sweep the cobblestones of the streets, where we take so much care not to slip, that clean this room where we're at now, between round tables, trying to become invisible while they're doing their own task, trying not to disturb us. I greet and I ask Eshu, the Lord of the paths of the market, of communication, of transit, his blessing. I ask him to guide my words, those that have my skin, my tongue, and my heart. Let's have a fantastic conversation. Thank you. I will read a chronicle of my new book that we're launching today in Raquel Publishing House, Beautiful Girl and Chronicles, and I need your help. Those that come from where I come from, you will know when to interrupt. Don't leave me alone. Don't leave me alone. It's not like the politician caller, not at all. Join me, join in. Come on, let's go. We don't have the possibility of doing anything, but Patella sounded in the middle of the night with a referee when there is an offside, with a risk of not knowing what's going on up until when we have to go by the rules of the game. Contra Malaysia, she was weeping, indifferent to her residual and compassionate, resignated manner. The owner of the knee and the patella was always saying that they didn't consider the effects of 2 years of the pandemic and all of the problems, especially sedentarism, excess of kilos, lack of muscular exercise, and any exercise practiced during the quarantine and the lockout. Pain was new. The level of pain was a limitation to exert some movements, but it didn't hurt. That is why she didn't know what to do. What a nuisance, I can't sleep. And then came the idea to pray for the saints, to try to bless the knee, to make the pain go away and give her some rest. The laptop, the companion in times of war, was resting. And of course, after 50 years, my team had won, and in the summit of success, I wanted to revive the saint in the screen. I used the mantras of always, the decisions in 78, 79, 78, in the soccer cups. The saint dead in the eyes of the adversaries, but in the eyes of the faithful, the reborn Adoshai, ready to decide. The Holy Trinity, the saint. And the fans aware of their predestination. To see that man playing football made us cry out of joy, out of happiness, out of pain, together with him. And it wasn't different that day. The strength of our prayer was gaining force. Mantra, the chanting of the fans, and it curved in the faith. It made all of the nation, all of the country cheer for our team. If you are in that team, King, 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 that was the chanting. Ray, 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 Ronaldo is our king. Ray, 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 Ronaldo is our king. Cheering, my God, chondromalacia level 1 and the infiltrations in the knee of the saint and the meniscs that had suffered so much. Nothing, no pain. Ray, Ray, Ray. Reynaldo is our king. Cheering our athlete, our soccer player. Ray, Ray, Ray. Reynaldo is our king. Chanting, Ray, Ray, Ray. Save Reynaldo from the Mineiro Athletic Football Club. A reference of poetry in my childhood, Sundays in my childhood. The man that taught me with his celebration of the fist, closed fist held up high. He taught me who the Black Panthers were when I was 9. Save Reynaldo. Long live Reynaldo. I loved it when we were talking and we decided to open this round table with their fragments, reading their excerpts, because the first question, the first topic I want to share with you today has to do with the position as storytellers in this round table. But maybe you can represent other formats, other genres. But the interesting thing is what you tell in your short stories. Cidinha, I remembered before we talked about your book, Songs of Love, when you published your book as a poetry, these are narrative poems, and you talk about love stories amongst women. So I wanted you to talk about that, how gender and narrative or the format of the text that you choose contribute, and also tell the stories that you want to tell. Great, okay. Well, when I talk with my students, for instance, I am a teacher of Brazilian literature at Mackenzie University, is that we cannot tame literature. We cannot put literature in a box. We can't restrict literature. So what does this mean? I always tell them, our students, theory is 2 steps behind literature. It is as the cartoons when you have the roadrunner running away. So that is literary theory. Why am I saying this? Because literary genres, they are lights for navigation. And what is navigation? Literary creation. So they will guide us as lighthouses. But genres are a provocation, and they're not a straitjacket that you have to wear and that you have to respect as a creator or writer. No, they're just a guide. And for instance, in the case of my last 2 short stories, The Other Margin of Leviathan and Northeastern Gothic, published by Alfaguara Publishing House, I introduce the logics of a romance, of a novel, because these short stories can be read one by one. They are part of a broader story, of a broader atmosphere. So you realize that maybe, I don't know whether we can talk about a novel in these short stories, but the architecture of these short stories have a common text. In The Other Border of Leviathan, the main character of the first story, it was a secondary character in the second short story, and then it was a narrator in the third. Northeastern Gothic is a collection of 9 books in the Northeastern with an influence of the aesthetics of horror stories and magic realism. So there is a trend, a very strong trend in the fragmentation of contemporary storytelling. And this is also apparent in The Other Border of Leviathan, but it didn't make sense for me. So for instance, within contemporary literature, I decided to go back to 19th century Gothic storytelling to build my book, Northeastern Gothic. So it is the logic and the rationale of a novel for my stories, but it is a more canonic or out of fashion or kitsch literary structure, and I introduce it in the Brazilian literature. That is the path I followed. Well, most of my publications are chronicles. And a lot of people that read or study what I write say that there are undefined borders between storytelling, short stories, or chronicles. People even say it's a short story chronicle, but it's nothing that interests me. I think a chronicle is a chronicle. A short story is a short story. And there are many chronicles that look like short stories. Why am I making this clarification? Because what I like to do is to define what a chronicle is. When you talk about a chronicle, because a chronicle is the poor cousin of Brazilian literature. So there is a sort of will to emphasize and talk about how chronicles are great, but in this crossroads, some think about this characteristic that tries to define my narrative. I believe that there are two main characteristics in my chronicle writing. First, many chronicles have characters, and people think that if there is a character in a chronicle, it is a short story. But the difference that I can think about is that a short story is a well-rounded, finished story that you remember afterwards. And this is not applicable to a chronicle. A chronicle does not work this way. And the other difference, the other concept that maybe make my texts or my work can't be easily defined in terms of genre has to do with the fact that I write chronicles that are not factual. My chronicles are open, and readers can keep on thinking about the plot, which is the case of a short story. So I defend chronicles because I want to value chronicles in a situation in which it is undervalued, and not because I want to defend a genre. No, it's more a political attitude to value chronicles as a genre. Cidinha, if I may, I would like to make a comment because what you're saying is so interesting. The perception that we have of the chronicle as the poor cousin of literature, and what you're saying as a political act, because when we're teachers, what will educate readers? Chronicles. Chronicles are in the front line of literary thought. Why? Because they are the essential link in school and the essential link for readers. That is the food of everything that we're living here in Flip. So what you really said resonates with me, and I think that we should give chronicles with the love and dignity that this type of narration deserves. So, well, this brings me to the second topic. In Brazil, there is a tradition of storytellers, chronicles, and canons that are characterize this, and you are here as creators that take this to a different dimension, interpreting Brazil in a different way. So there is a tradition, and it's very difficult to talk about tradition in singular. It is difficult not to say that a text produced from oral traditions or popular traditions are part of other traditions, traditions in plural. So are you part of a tradition? Do you feel that you're part of a canon, a tradition? And if this is not the case, what is the foundation of your narratives or of your texts? Well, yes, I believe I am part of a tradition of writers, black Brazilian writers in Brazil, women writers, male writers in Brazil that are looking for singularity and storytelling in their work. So I am really interested in texts written by Paulo Lins, Ana Maria Gonçalves, Marlene Felito, to talk about contemporary writers, as well as João do Rio, Mena Barreto, Machado de Assis, Carolina de Jesus, Maria Firmina dos Reis, the paying tribute, Ruth Guimarães. I feel not, I would say, close, but rather I am part of these contemporary writers, those writers that came before me, in a dialogue. And other than that, I'm also interested, and I also feel part of African traditions, Afro-Brazilian, Afro-Indigenous, Afro-diasporic traditions. I believe that these traditions are the amniotic liquid that nourishes me. And these traditions, this dialogue and this intention in a tension and dialogue relationship with contemporary times. So beyond literary tradition, we have these traditions, and also the tradition in music, which is an essential part of my work. Fortunately, we can celebrate that Gilberto Gil, that had a situation in Qatar, he suffered a situation with those that are in favor of Bolsonaro's government, and I dialogue with these artists of contemporary Brazilian music. I agree with Cidinha. Yes, I believe that each author, Nanni, is a convergence of different traditions. We, Brazilian writers, we write in the middle of two borders, Latin America and the Portuguese language. So we have the Latin American literary traditions. I am a Brazilian writer, but I am a Latin American writer, and Cidinha probably too feels this way. So these two borders, you need to bargain as Brazilian writers. The border as a Latin American writer, and the border, the very rich border of the Portuguese language that will live in Latin America, that is lived in Europe, and that is lived in Africa and East Timor. So what other tradition am I part of? Well, fantastic Brazilian literature. This is my tradition, which is the tradition that has been erased in our culture, in our literature. And we were talking about this, weren't we, in the backstage? What do I feel? Well, I feel that this is a cycle of depletion of the traditional historiography of Brazilian literature, the traditional way of telling our literature. And what is the traditional story of literature? Is the story that believes that the exclusive calling of our literature is to build a national identity, and that this literature is solely related to literary culture. Traditions are, of course, literary culture is important, of course, but what I believe is that we're in a transition moment in which other traditions, Cidinha, other voices, other oral voices are increasingly invited, finally, to be heard as they deserve. And a symptom of this is that Maria Firmina is the tribute author at Flip today. So traditions, canons, and canons are an extremely temporary consensus that we establish in the lava of the tectonic plaques of literary creation. And these tectonic plaques, this lava, will crack, will fall down, and we will create again our tradition. That is how I feel things are here in Brazil. And just to elaborate a little bit more this topic, and to invite our Gothic representatives to this party, Cristhiano and Camila Sosa Villada. And Cristhiano talked with her at the auditorium, and I was the moderator with Camila here on Thursday, and they're very strong representatives of magical realism in Latin America. Definitely, yes, we have this meme. Everybody had fun, and now Gothics will have fun too. We have the meme. Okay, so along the lines of our conversation, and remember that you can ask questions. Remember that you can ask questions from the audience. So I want you to talk about what is the space that you occupy in your literary production. What is the tools that you use to write the story of Brazil? In your literary projects, in the text, in your narrative, how do you expect these narratives will be read in Brazil of tomorrow? Of course, there are iconic writings. We remember Clarice Lispector writing her book Mineirinho, and we can remember how things were when she published this, and chronicle as a genre published in journalism. Cidinha does this in social media. So how do you see the potential characteristic and dimension of your work as a food for thought of Brazil's literature in the future? Well, let me tell you how Northeastern Gothic was created. Well, I wrote this book in 2018, Cidinha, Nanni, and what I thought of, I finished the book in the first year of the pandemic, 2020, and I had the very strong image of my childhood and adolescence. I was born in Campina Grande, which is the capital city of Forró, the dance, the typical Northeastern dance, and the capital city of Juliet. And every time I left Campina Grande, I went to the city of João Pessoa or Recife. I went through the sugar plantations, and I was always surprised by the scene of putting fire in sugar canes, the smoke and the sparks. It's a biblical scene, and I joke and I say when they are burning sugar canes, it is the apocalypse, a miniature apocalypse. And I thought, I need to take a look at this daily scene and understand which are the different apocalypses in Brazil. And Northeastern apocalypse is what I want to show, the other side through science fiction, showing the horrors that we live. So that is why my short stories, my 9 short stories, take place in 120 years. We start in last century with Vargas' dictatorship, and we come all the way to the present time. It's a dystopic approach, and that is what I want to show in my book. Well, when we started this round table, I was talking outside with a journalist that published an article that I liked in today's newspaper, Folha de São Paulo. Take a look. And he was telling me, well, I believe that it is fantastic that we have orishas and chronicles, and this was not the case in Brazilian literature in the past, and I think this is great in your work. And I said, well, it's not exactly that it didn't happen. I mean, the new thing is that it is happening from inside, because the stereotypes and the stigma and the unfavorable approach towards us, Black people, African subjects, orishas as a subject matter was always present in some writers. And we were the foundation, the subject matter foundation of these authors. The new thing is the fact that now we can talk about these subjects from within, with a challenge of creating literature, that is, creating an aesthetics a language articulating form and content, giving consistency, increasing surprise, novelty as a subject matter. Maybe that is the new thing. And along these lines, I believe that our production in such a way will give voice to these narratives that are now showing up, coming up, and it is expected in a way that they will be more present today in the near future, and that our narrative, our work, will be read as a way to interpret Brazil. Ultimately, we're talking about Brazilian literature, aren't we? What we do is Brazilian literature. We're looking at Brazil, looking at the world from our existence. These places that were built by us, because a racist society has no room for us, or rather reserves places that are subdued. And the places with dignity that we need to occupy are built by us, by the previous generations, by those of us that are here now. So I believe that literature that we produce, our narrative, is a literature that is pregnant, a pregnant literature that will give birth and give birth to new things, different things. We will give birth to new things and different things to the world. Yes, I agree, Cidinha, with what you're saying. The stories that you tell, I tell, are stories that produce knowledge about our country beyond anthropology, sociology, or cartography. Our chronicles talk about our country. And another comment that I would like to make, Nanni, is the following. I believe that if you embrace fantastic literature, has to do with our daily reality. I mean, I don't know, Cidinha, what you think, but I believe that, or what you think. But for me, reality is totally nonsense. It's totally dystopic, totally absurd. Maybe we had elections. It was such an agony with people in the streets that demonstrated, not only requesting military intervention, but alien intervention due to the results of the elections. And this was only found in Russian literature. And the borders of space and time are not what they used to be 50 years ago. Let me give you an example. With Flip as a model. The four of us are here. Our sign language interpreters, Cidinha, Nanni, myself, and we are not only here, we are multiplied in 4 different dimensions. What do I mean by this? We're here physically present, we are multiplied in YouTube, we are transmitted in a TV channel, we are in Instagram posts, and there are other areas in the screen, in the auditorium. Several Nannis, Cidinhas da Silva, and Cristhiano multiplied in this space and time fluidity. Is this science fiction? Well, this was part of the Argentine writer Adolfo Bioy Casares in Morel's Invention. He wrote about this. So this is the fruit of science fiction writers that wrote about this dystopic reality, which now is a reality. Well, wow, my God, great, I loved it. Well, and in closing, we're closing this round table. We're running out of time. Yes, I know, this conversation is great. I would like to ask you to talk about our small publishing houses that made the publication of your work possible. These small publishing houses are the most relevant in the Brazilian publishing arena. I could mention several, so I will forget. So we have so many, and fortunately there are so many small publishing houses. So let's talk about what is your career as writers of small publishing houses. Yes, great. Small publishing houses, small and medium publishing houses are responsible for what we have called book diversity in the world of books, in the world of literature, in the world of reading. These small publishing houses are the ones that bring and invite African writers, invite them to our country, and then there are other works of literature that are published and purchased by greater publishing houses afterwards by these great conglomerates. And small and medium publishing houses are brave to open to subjects that are not yet mainstream, that are not yet totally well received by the market, by people. Small publishing houses are brave and invest in people that are beginning to write, and they believe in these writers, even though they do not know what's going to happen or how long it will take to sell 1,000 copies of a book. And now we have smaller copies, smaller publishings of copies, which is an option. And as an author, I don't know what is your experience. We, as authors, I don't know what you think about this, Cristhiano, there are more possibilities in small and medium publishing houses to establish a dialogue, to talk, make suggestions of what we want in our books, how we as authors, we can talk about the graphic design project with the choices for the book cover, the choice of texts. So there is this possibility of greater participation in the book project as a whole, which is really very interesting. And we grow together. We, authors, grow together with the publishing house, and the publishing house grows with us. Publishing houses take us to places, and we also take our publishing houses to new places. It is a feedback loop, a fantastic and fruitful and rich relationship. And I myself joke with my friends, and I say that I have a catalog of publishing houses. I'm an author with a catalog of publishing houses, and that's how I want it. That's how I want things to keep on being. I want to follow Lima Barreto's tradition. Publish with small and medium publishing houses, great publishing houses, conglomerates of publishing houses, and that's how I shape and build my own publishing house's catalog. Yes, Cidinha, my experience is very similar to yours. I agree with you, and I think that the key word that we underline is this: book diversity. Book diversity is the essential concept. And Nanni, going back to what we mentioned earlier, tradition, canon, genres, part of rethinking what Brazilian literature is done daily, on a daily basis, by medium and small independent publishing houses. Great publishing houses, of course, the large ones contribute, have their role, of course, undoubtedly, but there are some risks, some bets in radical literary bets and projects that are difficult for large publishing houses, which we understand, of course. So my career is like yours, Cidinha. I joke and I say that I am in a silent, obscure literary career, which is totally independent, and we can have different formats. I published e-books, I published in hard copy books, pocket books, and now Alfaguara Publishing House, Companhia das Letras Publishing House. I respect them, and I cherish all the independent publishing houses and initiatives that shaped my career and are part of my professional career. I agree with you totally. Cidinha. So before we finish, and we decided that we would wrap this because we are Toro. We're 3 Toras here. I was waiting, Nanni, for you to say that. 3 Toras here. Okay, but before, a very interesting question that I think has everything to do with what we mentioned about publishing houses, which is the experience that you have with reading clubs. Reading clubs. Well, my experience is great. People are very generous, and I mean, as if it were not enough just to read our books, they publish posts, they publish articles, they recommend our books to their friends. I have my only collection of short stories published by Palace Publishing House and Issue in New York, which has great circulation in bookstores, but I believe that there are different factors which account for this success. And I know that one of the reasons why is that so many reading clubs read my novel, Issue in New York, and people lend books and they recommend my book, and it is, and I take this opportunity to thank reading clubs, because reading clubs are great. It's such a generous task, and it's so generous with us writers, and they greatly contribute to the circulation of what we write, and people do this out of love of our books, out of love for literature, with nothing, I mean, no material thing in exchange. They just do it because they believe in your project and they want to read the book together with you, and they want to broaden the circulation of the book, lending books and having greater access, that is broadening this network of writers that are valued by a particular reading club, specifically everything that has to do with the experience of the Read Women Reading Club here in Brazil. A reading club for women writers has been essential to spread the word of our literature as women writers. So I take advantage of this opportunity to thank you.
I agree with Cidinha, and I think that the readers' clubs, the resumption of them, they already existed, but they've intensified this activity recently. And this is one of the great pieces of news. The Northeast perspective entered in several of the clubs. One of the most beautiful scenes, most moving scenes for you to witness is this love for reading and for books that we find in the readers' reading club. So I'm also very grateful. And I think that they're extremely important. I participated in the reading clubs. I've done reading clubs. I set them up at the university. I've had writings by Cidinha in New York, and I think this truly is extremely important. This not only to have new themes that are changing, and here Cidinha is here, Trevosa is great, Gothic, and the forms of circulation of literature and reading are changing, and I think that's all for the better. I'd just like to ask one more question from the audience, because we were laughing before Chris told us this story. Great to be. You're going to understand this later. If it begins to rain and thunder, you'll know why. But here the question is, how do other arts, film, and others enter into the literary imagination of you two writers? Great. I think that we've run out of time, so this is a quick answer. They are essential for me. Why? Because I work a lot thinking of images, and as my creative process, an image emerges in my mind. Parachi, all closed off with jaguars walking around the streets. Based on that, I think, who is the person who's living the drama of the jaguars wandering the streets, and what's their story? And for that, I use and draw on the images from literature and poetry, but also audiovisual, for games, and especially video games, and especially comic strips, Northeast Gothic. The title is from DC Comics called the Monster Swamp. So it's a series of stories called American Gothic. In each edition, there are stories of horror stories in deep America. I thought if you have American Gothic, we're going to have a Northeast Gothic as well in Brazil. So that was where that came from. I think, Chris, that in my writing there's a lot of images, and also, but as you were talking, I think my process is somewhat different. I think that I draw a lot on the film and theater and comic strips as well. I read comic strips less today, but I used to read them a lot, but I read a lot of poetry and music. I always listen to music. And I think that all of these things kind of enter into me to use an image from Angelica Freitas. I do composting with them, after which all of this appears as an image in the text. And I think that I don't think of the image first, but the inputs, they come from the relationship with art. And the relationship with art, which is not art produced by me, which is art which idols and other writer colleagues and artist colleagues produce, and music especially. Music always has moved the ear, a good ear, and very finely attuned for hearing Brazilian music ever since my childhood, and both the songs that my parents sang at home. And I'm from a generation that listened to radio a lot also, especially a radio station in Belo Horizonte constantly playing, which constantly they tried to wipe out, which is Brasileiríssima, the FM radio station which is responsible directly for my musical formative years and poetic years, or my formative years with music and poetry. So let's move on to the readings to conclude this session. So I'm going to read a story called The Woman with Wet Feet, because it's the story which has this influence from the horror aesthetic in Northeast Gothic, and it's a story which is written in this idea, this provocation that my book has with regard to stereotypes which we Brazilians build about ourselves. And oftentimes, I've lived for 10 years in São Paulo, and I've always heard things like, okay, Cristhiano, you're here, but if you're left from the paradise, you have beaches up there, and it's sunny all the time. And I heard this so much, so I decided to have a story with a beach in the Northeast, the most terrible and cursed beach you could imagine. So you'll hear now 2 paragraphs from my leading character in this cursed beach as a vision of a kind of apparition which haunts him, but it's great that it's my day today. So let's go, take it away. It happened again. I had dreamt with a woman with the wet feet. She woke up out of breath, her short hair, red hair stuck to her forehead and nape, except for the fan which swayed on the top of an oil drum that was sitting next to her in the bed. Her left hand touched her belly, her own belly, for more than 3 months already, growing. It's odd, a dream to repeat like that. Elvira could not remember when the woman with the wet feet had appeared before, but she felt the certainty that was a repetition. The woman, smelling like the sea, emerged, sitting in her room, wrapped in shadows except for a ray of light coming God knows from where, which revealed her dead legs, green decomposing skin and varicose veins clogged with death, her eyes bulging out, 2 stains of her iris and pupils visible in the shadows, although they did not shine. Their the woman with wet feet got up with her gritting her teeth and stumbled toward the bed. Elvira could not move or shout or react. Drops came from the dark hair, the long hair of the woman, spraying over her with seaweed, with an intense odor, that smell that seaweed has when it rots for hours on the beach. With each step, a wet sound. When the woman with the wet feet was quite close to her, Elvira realized that her visitor's throat was opened up with and with something thick flowing out like tar. Suddenly, you could only see her feet, the soles of the feet falling apart. That was her dream. That was what Elvira tried to tell to her friends. Thank you very much. Okay, I talked a lot about this influence from music on things that I write. Some could read something here which shows this a little. It's called Delegate or Precinct Officer. I also felt it's from the book Exiled Issue, Police Officer. I also felt stepping on the ground of emeralds when I took my heart to the mango tree, and the police officer received me at the door, accompanying the standard bearer who offered me the standard for the kiss. Delegado was a great dancer to the slow step of his 90 years. Delegado. He was from the old guard, from the Carioca Bantu, with green and pink colors of Mangueira, the samba school. Open the way. Delegado and Mangueira will be parading elegance and tradition. And there comes Ana P., Deborah Marçal, and Claudia Adão, both of them kids from the dance school. The joy of renovation, renewal, all of the kids from Mangueira receiving the master dancer with tambourines, berimbau, feijoada, and great samba. Xangô, Cartola, Carlos Cachaça, the old guard, Senhor Preto Rico, Nelson Cavaquinho, Jamelão, Tom Jobim, and the girls, Dona Nelma and Dona Zica. Portela also paid tribute. Manasseh, Zequete, Tiadoca, Candeia, Clara Nunes, João Nogueira, winking a welcome to the sabotage hiding on the corner with broken verse. And everybody came that made our souls dance. Caíme, Pastinha, Garrincha, Didi, Leônidas, Vila Lobos, Pixinguinha, Elisete, and Chiquinha Gonzaga, escorted by Cássia Eller on the one hand and Elise Regina on one hand, Cazuza and Roberto Ribeiro. Marçal, Nano, Desce da Viola, Aniceto, Mansueto, Paulo Moura, and Luiz Carlos da Vila. Noel, Aracide Almeida, Ataúfa, Gonzagão, and Itamar Assunção could not be left out or missing. Moreira da Silva, Bezerra, Jovelina, and Gonzaguinho come together and streetwise telling their verses about their afternoon nap in the corner where the owl sleeps. There's going to be real summer. Timaya came late. He was charged with singing to Delegado the Song of Roses, which speak of the blue, the color of the sea. Thank you very much. Thank you, Flip. Thank you to the curates. Thank you to who came. The writers will be signing their books over at the Travessa bookstore.